Hello. Hi, this is Colleen with Chats with Colleen. We welcome you to our podcast, which is posted bi-weekly. It's posted on all media platforms, and we invite you to like and share, and we also invite you to join us at any time. Please inquire. We will be glad to have you. Today, our guest is Mr. Jim O'Reilly. He is not only a general contractor, but he is also a mold specialist to detect mold and remediate it or advise you of how to remediate it within your home. Which is a great topic for right now. After the recent hurricanes, a lot of people did suffer, sadly, water damage within their home and their properties, and they may need his assistance to determine on what they should do. Also, I've been having a couple of clients who've been calling lately with tenants living in their home that are complaining of mold related issues. So it is a known fact in the state that we do suffer from a great deal of mold here. And a lot of people are highly allergic to it and are sensitive to the mold and what it could do to them, themselves, and their bodies. So it's a great topic, and I'm so glad he's here. He's a great friend and mentor of mine, and also a professional contact and resource. He's extremely knowledgeable, so it's going to be a great time and very informative. So, with that being said, again, we welcome you to the podcast, and we are inputting for any upcoming recordings. We're already booked out for the whole rest of the year, so we're going to start recording new ones for January 2025. So we're greatly excited about that. And we look forward to this upcoming podcast with Jim. Please reach out with any questions or concerns, and be well and be safe. Good afternoon. Hi, this is Colleen with Chats with Colleen. And today I have Mr. Jim O'Reilly here, who is a general contractor and a mold remediator. Did I say that right?
You did.
Okay, perfect. And so, which I've been hearing a lot about mold lately from my clients and their claims that they've been getting from people getting sick with mold. And we do live in Florida, so it is a probable thing. But I want to get into a little bit about you. So how long have you been in this line of work?
Well, for mold remediation, I started back during the great downturn in 2008.
Oh, a long time ago.
I was a home builder prior to that. And because of the downturn, I was looking for new ways of doing business. And I had an investor that had a mold problem. And we got into one of the houses, and I decided to make it a permanent part of my business.
Wow. And have you always lived here in Orlando area?
No, I've only been in Orlando about 8 years.
Oh, wow.
But I grew up in the Southeast and spent well over 4 decades in Georgia.
In Georgia, which it's humid there too, so I imagine they have mold and all types of issues like that.
They do indeed.
So I have like a general question, what causes mold?
Generally speaking, in one word, moisture. And mold is a type of fungus that thrives in damp environments. It doesn't necessarily have to be warm, but it tends to flourish in warm environments. But it can be found indoors and outdoors virtually everywhere. And people forget that mold plays a very essential role in nature in that it breaks down organic matter, such as leaves and sticks and things of that nature, so that it becomes eventually part of the soil.
Oh.
So it's a very good thing in the environment, but it can be a problem when it grows in places like homes where it can damage surfaces and pose health risks. So mold can produce allergens and even toxins, so controlling moisture and cleaning the affected areas is very important for maintaining a healthy environment.
And where would you say mold is? I mean, is it pretty much everywhere?
It is absolutely everywhere, and it depends on the species of mold. There are thousands of species of mold, and there are some that thrive more on drywall, say, than the species of mold you might find under a kitchen sink or something along those lines. But yes, in the state of Florida, you can go into virtually any building and find it.
I bet. Yeah. That's what I've always told my clients. Pretty much mold is like everywhere, especially here with the humidity. But but
Indeed, and that's a very important point to touch upon, because inside of houses in particular, studies will show that if you're able to keep your relative humidity below 55%, then your chances of having an issue with mold are greatly reduced. Now, during the summer months, June, July, August, September, that can be a challenge for most HVAC systems. So we always recommend that our clients go and purchase a dehumidifier, and that will help the HVAC system wring out some of the moisture that's in the air and keep molds down to a minimum.
oh, that's a good idea. And where could they buy that? In any home improvement store?
Usually on Amazon,
Amazon
or
too?
HD.com. There are any number of well-known companies that produce dehumidifiers, and you don't need to buy a lot of them. If you buy one of them and keep them in a central location, and you can even put them on a timer, and timers are very inexpensive at your hardware store. You can usually acquire one for $10 to $15, plug in the dehumidifier, and have it run, say, from 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning when there's a lot of moisture in the air.
Really? So can mold be harmful to people and to animals?
It can be, yes. And a lot of people, or a lot of clients that we talk to, will say, well, I'm just very, very allergic to mold. Well, in the reality, everybody's allergic to mold, and it really depends on how robust their immune system is in dealing with it. But yes, mold can be a problem for virtually anybody and everybody, and generally speaking will produce allergic type responses: upper respiratory distress, sniffling, watery eyes, maybe itchy skin, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it's a problem, and some species of molds can be really problematic if not dealt with effectively.
Because I've heard of people winding up in the hospital because of mold exposure.
It can happen. It's not
That
not that common, but it does happen occasionally. And with individuals who have a hypersensitivity, it certainly is prevalent.
That's scary.
Yeah.
And then after a water leak, would you say how soon would something like this start happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it can happen almost immediately. Molds form within 24 to 48 hours.
Oh,
So the real onus is to clean that problem up as quickly and as effectively as you possibly can. And again, a dehumidifier in this kind of a situation is your best.
and that's why when those companies come in, they normally bring those and those fans
They
that's
bring
sucking
fans
it out.
that help dry it out. And the idea is to dry the environment out as quickly and as effectively as possible.
And then I've heard of some people saying that you spray bleach on it, but is bleach like a really good remedy for mold?
In general, no. Bleach can kill mold on non-porous surfaces like tiles, glass, and some countertops, although I don't necessarily recommend that bleach be used on some countertops. It can effectively kill molds on the surface, and in some cases remove some discoloration. So if you have a bathtub or a toilet or something along those lines that is made of porcelain or fiberglass, yes, bleach can be very effective. But typically what we recommend is people use white distilled vinegar. It's a much more effective and safer remedy to deal with molds that are on hard surfaces. For porous surfaces, it's often a little bit more difficult, and we tell people not to use the bleach, because bleach typically has about 20% chlorine in it, and chlorine will typically remove the head off the top of the mold but leave the root, and as part of that chemical reaction will leave water as part of the residual effects of that chemical reaction. So
It'll come back.
it's going to come back. So on the porous surfaces, I would not recommend using bleach at all. Plus, bleach is somewhat harmful. I mean, chlorine is not a good thing to deal with.
To breathing in. So
Right.
you say the head of it. So like the mold is like a little plant and such?
It is. It's a fungus, but if you want to think, many species have a shape similar to a tree, only in a microscopic form. So, and the top form will release mold spores into the air. And those spores are really the things that are going to affect you and your cardiovascular system.
In your lungs. Oh,
Right.
wow. So when you have an issue with mold, let's say you had a large water leak and you maybe didn't get somebody over there to start sucking out the water fast enough, what would somebody have to do to remove those mold growth within their home?
The best thing to do is to treat it with a combination of distilled white vinegar and maybe some hydrogen peroxide. But generally speaking, I would recommend highly to have a professional deal with it, especially if it's on non-porous surfaces. Excuse me, porous surfaces. The non-porous surfaces are pretty easy to deal with. There are any number of over-the-counter remedies that are very effective, as I said, for metals, glass, tile, hard surfaces where the mold cannot get its roots into that substrate.
So we're talking about like the walls and stuff. And is it anything where they have to like actually cut the walls?
Sometimes that is necessary, especially if the structural integrity of the drywall has been affected or it gets really wet. Then yes, I highly recommend removing it, and then you remove the mold and the drywall at the same time. But ironically, our bias is not to do that as a general contractor because it's more expensive to do it. It isn't always necessary to do it to affect a good solution. And it's a little bit more time consuming for each individual job. So we don't always recommend doing that, but in some cases it's absolutely necessary.
Right. And then when this happens, like what's normally the time period to get something removed from the home? Is it like you come and they clean it and it's gone at one time, or is this something that you have to repeatedly treat?
No, generally speaking, you can go in and remediate the home, and it takes a little less than 24 hours.
Oh.
And then after that remediation, we'll do a post-test. And that post-test goes to an independent lab and then shows us whether or not we did what we said we were going to do. So in effect, it's like a report card on our work. So we guarantee our work. So in any case where we don't pass a post-test, we come back for free and we deal with the problem effectively to return the home to what we call a normal fungal ecology, meaning that you can live in the home. It's not necessarily sterile. There are still molds, but it doesn't reach
The
levels that would be considered.
Because every house, I'm sure mine would have, I mean, every house would have mold, like you said, but it just depends when it reaches a certain level. And so an office I was at years ago, when you turned the corner in a particular hallway, you could smell like that musty and it smelled like mold. And I didn't realize it, but somebody else came in there and he said, "It's so moldy in here." So I guess he was more sensitive. Does mold have like a certain smell?
Some of the species do have smells.
Okay.
Yes, they do indeed. And while a lot of people have mildew in their bathrooms,
Right.
and we typically recommend that they get a small oscillating fan because most master bathrooms in particular are a little bit off the beaten path, so to speak, in the house plan. So the airflow isn't as great.
Doesn't really get to there. Yeah.
Exactly. And in addition, the fans that are placed in the ceilings of most bathrooms, a lot of people think that they are for hygiene purposes, which is not true. They are designed to remove moisture from the bathroom. So you should put those fans on 10 minutes before you shower and leave it on 10 minutes after, especially in a state like Florida where the humidity levels are very high. Sure.
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay. So I know right now the cost for everything is expensive. So I imagine this is no exception. Is mold removal, mold remediation costly? I imagine
it tends to be a little bit more expensive, yes. But remediation may not be necessary even though you might think you have a problem. So we highly recommend having a test done before. So in our case, we know specifically what parts of the house have a problem and which parts of the house do not. Because you can have certain areas of a house that have problems, thinking maybe with a bathroom or a laundry area, anywhere where there's water, you're typically going to have more elevated counts of mold spores than you would in, say, a family room or a dining room.
And I've had a couple people come to me and tell me that, their AC unit is full of mold.
Very common.
Is that common?
Very, very common.
So when they say that, and then I'm just thinking, okay, so the AC unit's full of mold. There's all those AC vents. So does that mean it's shooting out all these mold spores all through their house?
It does indeed.
It does.
Yes.
And that's common.
It's
so
very common.
Is it common, but is it harmful? It
can,
depends on the
It
species.
depends. Yeah, it can be. And the mold counts, if you have a very high count, it can be something that you need to have a professional deal with.
So they may need to get a new air conditioner's whole system?
Not necessarily, but
Okay.
we may want to recommend that the ducts be cleaned because especially in new construction, and I saw this as a home builder very, very commonly, even though we would cover the ducts with what we call OSB, which is basically plywood, somehow or another debris gets into those ducts.
I imagine.
And if you want to think of wood or paper as organic debris, mold loves organic substances. So if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. When the air conditioning system is off, that air that's within the ducts is much warmer. And then all of a sudden, cool air gets forced through that ductwork, and there's condensation that occurs as the cooler air actually collides with the warmer air. Condensation forms even though you might not be able to see it. So you have condensation, you have an organic substrate, you've got a perfect environment for mold formation.
Oh, that's scary. Especially because, people are thinking new construction is going to be perfect.
It can happen. I'm not saying it happens
Right.
in all cases, and some builders are better at dealing with these sorts of things than others. But yes, I have seen plenty of that in my career.
What always makes me scared is when I see them building the homes and they don't have the roofs on it, and then it's pouring down rain. And I know the wood's treated, so it's not going to become moldy, right?
Well, some of it is treated. And we won't go too far afield in this area. Green wood is treated. And any wood that comes in contact with concrete needs to be green wood, which means it's been treated so that you don't have these kinds of problems. But the rest of the framing lumber is just kiln dried. So it's not resistant to mold in any way. But, generally speaking, if it has time to dry out and you should be fine. I'm not going to scare everybody and
Right.
say that in every case.
We don't want to
that's
scare
a problem.
anybody. A
Right.
new house is beautiful.
Right.
Keep buying them.
Right. Please. Keep the economy
Please.
going.
Yes. So what is the worst case that you've been involved with, personally, since you've been doing this?
Well, ironically, the worst case I came across was we had a job, and it wasn't that long ago. It was within the last year here in Orlando, and it was a hotel. And we had 54 rooms that had the worst kind of mold, which is called Stachybotrys. It's black mold, and it's very toxic. And we started removing some of the walls, and the more we removed, the more we found. And this particular hotel had water leaks all over the place. And in addition, they had the air conditioning units that were under the windows in the wall, and there were gaps between the air conditioning unit and the actual wall, so outside air was coming in as well. So it was just, excuse the pun, but it was a toxic mix of variables that made for a bad situation. Well, we cleaned it up and resolved the issue, but it was
that sounds
a job that was not going to take 2 or 3 days.
No, that sounds like a lot of work and a lot of money for that hotel.
Yes, it was.
And then hopefully nobody got sick in that place.
None of our people did, because
Right.
as soon as I went in and I saw
How bad it was.
I made everybody suit up. I made everybody.
That's what I was going to ask. Do they have to wear special
They
suits?
do. They do, and masks so that they can breathe properly, and because we don't want the safety of our employees are paramount, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right reasons.
And I know, the workers' comp for that that exposure, they call it, would be very high because
it's very high.
It's very expensive because they could get sick, and then they get sick and it's repeated treatments.
Exactly.
Like anything. And with that being said, I've had 2 calls this in the past like 2 months about mold. And I have one that said their prior tenant is suing them for mold and then being sick. She also said maybe the tenants were repeated sewers. I don't know. But she said they've been at the hospital a couple of times. They have, all these horrible headaches and they can't work and they're so sick, and they have an ongoing lawsuit, which will take years. And then I have another one. The tenant was growing, I told you, lettuce in like those hydroponic things inside the house, which I guess requires a lot of humidity. So they were running some type of fan like all day long, but the air wasn't cycling on and off. So he said it did cause mold in the house. Now he has to pay to have it removed. And this couple was in the ER sick.
I hate to hear those kinds of
Me
things.
too.
It's really, because it's avoidable. And coming full circle, we said at the outset, mold needs one thing and one thing only: moisture. And if you cut off the moisture, you're pretty much on your way to resolving the problem. That's not to say that molds don't grow in some dry environments, and we don't want to get too far afield. But,
right.
Generally speaking, if you have a good handle on the moisture situation within the building, then you generally have a pretty good handle on the mold situation.
Yeah, because you could almost tell if you go in somewhere and it's like humid, even if the air circulating, you can tell when something's like, it's hard to, I guess we live here and we're used to everything being freezing cold when we're inside a building. But if it's humid, you can tell when you're sitting in there.
You can, and I can't tell you how many clients' houses we go into, and the thermostat may be set at 70 or 71 or something cold, and the humidity is 62 or 64%. Very, very common.
Oh.
And it feels clammy even though the temperature is chilly. I keep my temperature at 78 degrees in my home, but I keep the dehu running almost 24/7.
Really?
So I'm very comfortable, even though the temperature is higher, but I never allow my humidity to get over 45%.
So I need to get my dad one of those dehumidifiers because he keeps his house 78, but it is so hot in there. We're almost sick when we go over there. Sorry, Dad, I love you, but it's hot in there. Yeah. But I think he needs a dehumidifier, and that would make it more comfortable.
And we can recommend one for you.
Okay, thank you. So with this day and age, I don't know if you experience it, but since I deal with insurance and, mold on some policies isn't covered, on some policies it is. But it's got to be caused by a covered loss, a water leak, a roof leak, something. And so when I tell people, they're like, well, I just have mold in my house. Okay, so I always try to tell them, well, something else must be going on that's causing this to happen.
Exactly.
No. So it must have been an ongoing issue.
Yeah, there are so many things, and that's really one of the things that I think I bring to the table as a licensed contractor, is that we try to understand where the moisture is coming from. And I understand building science reasonably well, so if we can find where the moisture is coming from and then put a stop to that,
yes,
we're well on our way to resolving the problem. So we spend a lot of time and effort trying to do just that. And I have seen cracks in stucco that I would characterize as a spider crack that people were incredulous when I said, oh no, there's moisture getting in, and then go into the unit on the inside, pull back the carpet, and look at the tack strips, and they're black. And people don't believe me that moisture can get in there. Just because it doesn't seem like moisture can get in there doesn't mean that it isn't. And
that makes a lot of sense that you say that, why the insurance companies, they're concerned about chipped paint and they're concerned about little cracks. And they're like, oh, it's just a little, I know it's normal, but it being sealed and painted protects your house from water getting in. And that's the reason why, because water losses, which cause mold, are like one of the most costliest losses in our state of Florida, as you know.
And it's really important as an added tip to look at your painting on the exterior of the home, because in the state of Florida, where we have pretty hot summers, there's a lot of expansion and contraction going on with the building unit itself. And as that unit expands and contracts, little cracks form.
Yeah.
And then the style of construction for the most part in Florida is concrete block. And then the stucco is applied on the outside of it. So once the moisture has gotten into the concrete block area, it generally is going to find a way into the living unit. So it's really important to make sure that you do a walk around once a quarter. You check your windows and your doors to make sure that they're sealed properly. Look for cracks in your stucco, and make sure that those are taken care of by a professional so that you can make sure that, again, the interior part of the unit is staying dry.
It's safe, yeah, and it's like good practice to do that anyways. And then with the general contractors piece that you have you seen, I know things are expensive, but have you seen people's expectations of what they should pay and what they should be getting done changed in the last couple years?
Yes, and it's really, it's hard because it's not just our clients who are having to deal with that. I'm having to deal with it as well. Just as recently as yesterday, I asked somebody, one of my guys who does a lot of work for me, to give me an estimate for some work for concrete. And it's just incredible how expensive things have.
Concrete is expensive.
And the labor has gotten very expensive as well. So, things have changed rather dramatically since COVID. Before COVID, there seemed to be some sanity in the marketplace, but post-COVID, it's been a very difficult environment.
Has the labor pricing changed because the people that work won't do it for less, and then the cost, and that's like all this stuff drives up the cost of the economy, which we already know.
And then we have to quote that to the client, and they're having sticker shock, and I frankly can't blame them because we are too, and it's tough. It's a tough thing.
So they have to rearrange, like maybe some priorities, or rearrange what they're going to be doing.
Exactly. Or they may have to defer the project until a later date because maybe they don't have enough money at the present time. So there's some challenges to be sure, and materials prices have seemed to level off somewhat here recently, but there was a while there where we saw incredible increases, and no exaggeration, some of the materials we saw increasing by as much as 40%. So that flies in the face of the government statistics that, at some point in the past year, they said inflation was running at about 9%, and whereas now it's about a little less than 3% is the last number I heard. But we're still dealing with some pretty significant increases in material costs.
Yeah, and that's part of it. So that trickles down to like everything else, especially the insurance, because now everything costs more when they have to pay a claim. So I wanted to ask you too. So there's certain things people couldn't put off, like maybe they could put off redoing their kitchen or their bathroom, but they could not put off remediating for mold if they have mold in their house.
I would not recommend putting that off because there's only going to be more detrimental health effects. And going back to what I said at the outset, mold is a substance that breaks things down. So it might be something that breaks down the wood in your walls or the drywall or something along those lines. It's just not a good idea to defer that because more damage is going to occur, which means it's going to be more money in the end.
Yeah, and I imagine if they keep putting it off, like it could spread all the way maybe to the rafters in the attic and the house could become unsafe.
Well, it can become a sick building, and it can spread very easily to other areas because the very thing that created the mold in the first place, the moisture, hasn't been dealt with. So the mold is going to flourish and spread to other areas of the living unit.
I have a weird question. Have you ever been in a hoarder house?
I have.
You have?
I have.
Are they riddled with mold?
The ones we've been in have been, yes.
Oh my God.
Yes, and it was...
Was the person living there?
Yes, I'm thinking of a specific client who had her 40-year-old daughter living with her, and they literally had rabbit trails through the house with waist-high stuff throughout the house.
That's where they could walk through?
That's where they could walk. And they also had 9 cats.
Oh.
And with cat boxes throughout the house.
And you can't clean that correctly if you have not enough space.
No, and the kitchen was a mess.
That sounds horrific. And that they were living there.
Yes, they were.
Oh my God.
It was challenging, to say the least.
And they had a mold problem. That's why you went out there.
They had a big mold problem.
I'm sure they
in the
did.
kitchen. Yeah.
They had a little bit more than that. Did they let you clean out the house?
We deferred.
Okay.
We just said,
we can't help you.
Yeah, exactly.
They needed a little bit more than you.
Yeah, they really did. And quite honestly, there's some people who have some issues that we're not qualified to resolve. And we have to know our limitations. While we think we're really good at what we do, and I think we are, that doesn't mean that we're supermen and we can resolve every problem that we come across. We cannot.
Yeah, I think for something like that, because I'm just thinking of like clients that buy, properties to renovate, and sometimes they don't see them and they would go in and it's a hoarder house. I feel like when they get the house cleaned out, they probably need to have somebody like you come in and do mold testing.
Yes, and if they have things like carpet,
that needs to go.
That needs to be removed along with the pad. And quite honestly, the walls need to be all clean. The ceiling needs to be clean. The electrical fixtures, things like fans, need to be thoroughly cleaned. So,
or just get new ones.
It's a challenging, very challenging environment when you run across that.
Yeah, I know that's a common thing here, and I know with the mental health issues. That's why I brought that up, because I know mold, how sick it is. Yes, but if somebody wants to get in touch with you, for a general contractor consultation or a mold issue, how would they do that?
The best thing to do would be to look us up online rather than trying to memorize a phone number.
Yes.
My company name is Navigate Construction and Restoration of Orlando. But if you Google Navigate Construction and Restoration, you should be able to pull us up and call us, and we're more than happy to come out and do an assessment of your home to see whether or not a test is necessary, because we don't recommend remediation unless we first do a test. And I think that's the appropriate thing to do, but it also gives our client a little bit more peace of mind knowing that there is a specific problem and that we're not trying to get one over on them and just charge them a bunch of money for a non-existent problem.
Which I have heard some companies doing that, and they come and give them a whole spiel and then the client, by the time they call me, they're all worked up, and I'm like, oh, okay, I understand, but I know, they're going to come rip the walls out. We have to do all this, and like you said, it may not be necessary. There may be some other tips that they can do.
Exactly. And we try to be full service, and more importantly, we try to be honest. And I think if you do that, most people appreciate it, and most people will come back and say, hey, use Jim the next time you have one of these types of issues.
Yes, and for sure. And I have your information. It'll be on our site, and we'll also tag it for you. And so if anybody has any issues, I've referred people to you because I trust you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm so glad that you got to join us today, because it was great information, and I learned, I didn't really know, sadly, that mold was a plant, so I feel bad. But now you taught me something.
It's a fungus.
It's a fungus, but
right. It's similar, depending on the species.
Has a root.
It has a root, and it's called hyphae, and there's lots of interesting stuff that would be great for curing insomnia, but it's depending on the species, but generally speaking, I like to think of it in simple terms that way, and it helps me conceptualize and also speak to it a little bit more basically to some people who don't really want to know anything but the bottom line when it comes to mold.
That's a good one. So thanks again.
You're welcome.
You'll have to come back again.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. listening and joining us. If you haven't already, please share, subscribe, and like our episodes and our podcast. Also, leave a review. It will be so helpful to us, and we would so appreciate it. Also, if you want to join us at any time, we're open to any guests joining us in person and on Zoom. We post and record episodes bi-weekly, so that's twice a month. Also, they're posted on our socials, which is Facebook, Secured Insurance Group, Instagram, Colleen Insurance Lady. This podcast was hosted by myself, Miss Colleen Pacheco, and recorded and produced and edited by Sean Spazzato. Our podcast cover art was designed and created by Norma Pacheco, and our intro and outro music is created by Lounge Bar by Geronic. Goodbye.